computer if it's.
Okay,
I'm
we have
curious though.
started.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Is there
So,
is there
welcome back to episode 4 of Spike the Tower. I'm Debanny. He's Jackson. We're gonna go ahead and just kind of do a little debrief, if you will, about what is going on with Texas volleyball. So, Jackson, they just finished up the regular season. They played Ole Miss in a thriller 5-set matchup. I don't think anyone was expecting them to go to 5 sets with Ole Miss, but I mean they came back from a 13-7 deficit in the fifth and won it. So I'm just curious to hear what are your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's a great way to close out the season. I mean, starting back to November 6th, speaking of the other team from Mississippi, part of that Egg Bowl rivalry, having a win streak spanning of 6 games to conclude the season after kind of a shaky middle part that included losses to
Mhm.
Mizzou and A&M, which we kind of hit on the last time we were on this show. So I think it's a really great way to conclude the season going into tournament play that Texas is going to be hosting a couple of games at Gregory Gymnasium. Should be a lot of fun there, for sure.
No, 100%. And when we were a couple weeks back when we were on the show, a few Longhorns received all SEC honors. And obviously Madison Skinner received, but that one was a given, a first team. Mariana Singletary, which we talked about her quite a little bit on this podcast as she waited her turn. She finally got the opportunity to be in there, and she was also named all SEC first team. And then you also had Reagan Rutherford, all SEC second team. And then
How
Aiden
about the
Ames, a
freshman love?
freshman.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm going to
How about
say.
the freshman? Not only did she win Gator, I mean, you talk about the accolades she has, what is it, received? She's won Freshman of the Week, SEC, all freshman team, and she won Gator Player of the Year. So just talking about all the accolades she's had within the past year, she's going to be so fun to watch once she continues to develop and is here all 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, when you start so well at such a young age, I mean, it's just super exciting to see how you kind of keep
Mhm.
improving. I mean, but it's also gets to a point where like, can you even keep improving, or do you just consistently stay great, or anything after that almost is viewed as a downwards, almost down, just because you start off so well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Coach Elliott, who has some ties to the Trojans that are playing at Gregory Gymnasium, how he handles kind of that growth of maintaining that greatness aspect.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yep, 100%. But you touched a little bit about like whether she's gonna grow or not. And I don't know if you had the chance to read, but ESPN put out a feature story on Madison Skinner. And it was like a really lengthy feature
Hmm.
story. It was beautifully written, but something that Madison Skinner touched on, and we talked about it on the podcast a couple of weeks back how Madison Center wasn't playing all 6 rotations. And obviously, everyone in the volleyball world was like, okay, well, why isn't she playing 6 rotations? And in that article, basically what happened was Coach Elliott decided to make a coaching switch because her serve receive it wasn't helping them win games. And so they eventually like pulled her aside, and the article goes and talks a little bit about Madison Skinner's mental health with volleyball, how her journey with volleyball, how she started playing volleyball at 14, which is fairly late for someone. I mean, that's a sport that you usually start at 7 or 8,
Yeah.
and she would miss high school dances and everything just so she can be there. And then after she plummeted, she went to Kentucky, got her national championship with her sister Avery. After that, she just kind of felt a little lost and felt like everyone was looking towards her, and everyone was kind of like looking towards her and be like, okay, well, what do we do next? And she felt like an immense sense of pressure. And at one point, she didn't even want to play volleyball anymore. And then she hit the portal. Coach Elliott recruited her. But in the article, it says the thing that caught her the most off guard was when she hopped on a phone call with Coach Elliott was they didn't speak anything about volleyball. It was more so a personable. He wanted to make that connection. Here she comes at volleyball, and towards the very end, it says that Coach Elliott wants to make sure where not all the pressure falls onto Maddie, where she doesn't become like the sole lifeline of reviving this team, like they can do it without Maddie. And that's exactly what they did. 2 weeks ago, Madison. No, no, no. I think it was senior night where she was out for one of the games and they still won. You had other people
Mhm.
who stepped up, and it talks a lot about the culture that this Texas volleyball team has. That they play for each other, and it's not a me game. It's not statistics like, oh, let's see who has the most kills, the most aces, and stuff like that. It's more so how can we win together as a team, and that mindset heading into the postseason is absolutely, it's so lethal, especially considering what they've gone through all season, especially with the little ups and downs of the rope. So it should be interesting. And like you said, it is going to be at Gregory Gymnasium. They've hosted a couple weeks. They've hosted a couple years like in a row now. And the first matchup's tomorrow against Texas A&M Corpus Christi.
Yeah, and I think that I know that piece you're talking about that came out. I mean, it's such a cool story. I mean, from the ups and downs of Madison Skinner going to Lexington, not fitting in, going to their sister, and then
Mm-hmm.
walking out to a sold out Gregory gym with the faith of a V on their finger. Just that whole story is just so awesome. And for I feel like it too. I mean, I feel like in a way it's already come full circle because you've already won a couple championships here at Texas.
Mm-hmm.
But to go and for potentially to try and do something that is so hard to do at the collegiate level volleyball wise and try to go back to back to back. I think that it's really exciting. It should be an exciting time to be a Texas volleyball fan, obviously, with all the success. But I mean, trying to do it again, I mean, is it even possible? Like, we're going to see, obviously, against Corpus. But I mean, still, I mean, it's going to be really exciting to see for sure.
What's interesting is the a three-peat has never been done before.
I know it's
So
ridiculous.
oh no, it's ridiculous. I mean, if they're able to pull it off, it should be interesting. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I don't necessarily think it. I think it could happen, but if you look at the grand scape of volleyball, and if you just like look at the bracket, I think they may or may not have a shot at going to the Final Four, but I think they'll. I think Penn State will beat them out before in the round of what would it be in the Elite Eight,
Yeah, they're on at eight. It's
in
definitely,
the
I
round of
think
eight.
this year, I think definitely is the hardest one that they've had. I think
Yes.
those
Hmm.
midseason struggles have highlighted that when they were almost 500 at one point, and they had lost like three straight games for the first
Three
time, and
straight games.
over, yeah, three straight games they lost, and over, I can't remember, like 8+ seasons. I mean, I think it was before Jared
Hmm.
Elliott was even there. The last time they'd lost three straight. So I mean, it's definitely going to be difficult for them, but I think to close out your season after struggling so much to beat some pretty decent teams. I mean, they weren't the best teams in the SEC for volleyball, but to go six straight, I don't think you could have asked to conclude your season much better for Jared Elliott and company.
Oh no, I 100% agree with that. And I don't necessarily think if they don't make it to the Final Four, or if they don't make it as far as everyone really anticipated, I don't necessarily think it's a failure for this team just because obviously they have a bigger target on their back, but they're not, I'm not saying this team isn't complete, but they're still missing a few key pieces. It's such a young team that I don't necessarily think it would be if they get booted out in the Elite Eight or if they don't even make it to the Final Four, it's not necessarily seen as a failure because it's such a young team. And the three-peat is it's definitely going to be a hard thing to come by.
Yeah, and the path there just maybe didn't mean having to play most likely Creighton later on and then to
Mm-hmm.
play Penn State. And that's just going to be really difficult. I mean, they've been hosting a pretty solid USC team that actually, Jared Elliott was the interim HC for
Mm-hmm.
way back in the day, back in the 2000 season. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of hitting on the same point. It's going to be a hard path and probably the hardest path they've had, just because of the fact that they kind of trickle down a little bit in terms of seeding and not having
Mm-hmm.
that one spot. Being at the three spot is still impressive in its own, but I kind of agree with what you're saying. I think it's more of a perspective shift for a program to when you're so dominant and dominant. It's like even if you go to the Elite Eight, I mean, most programs would kill to go that far, whether it's the Final Four or wherever they end up. It's just that standard is the standard kind of motto almost
Mm-hmm.
desensitizes the aspect of being able to be like, oh, this is a good season just because we didn't win a national championship. You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So even if you go to the Elite Eight, I still think it's a success, a success overall. I just think it may be hard to grasp that when that initially happens if they were to lose in the Elite Eight, etc.
Oh no, I 100% agree. And there was in the article that was featured on Maddie, there was a specific moment where they talked about how Texas had lost to A&M, and how yes, they're obviously still a little bit upset, but Maddie wasn't necessarily upset at herself because of the way she performed. And it's something that she went in the article. It says that she told her teammates like, "Hey, we played the best we could. At the end of the day, they just got the best of us." And I think that is such a refreshing perspective to look at it, especially when you have a captain and a leader of the locker room saying that it's no, 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 like it's okay that we feel like this, or like, yes, we lost, but let's look at the positives a little bit. And I think that speaks, like I was saying a little bit earlier, about Coach Elliott's culture on what this team is. It feels more like they're tight knit, more of a family feel than it's, oh yeah, the bonus is we also win games. But it's,
Yeah.
I care about you on a deep level.
That more like for that sense of community, I think
Mm-hmm.
is unmatched compared to almost any other team in the country. And I think that's a really good recruiting tidbit as well. It's just like, I mean, whether or not we win, I mean, it's kind of cliche, but it's almost like the power of friendship. You know what I mean? Like that
Yes.
aspect of like, we are a family, we are friends, like we are there for you on the ups, we're going to be there for you on the downs. And it's just so far the way it's played out, there hasn't been a lot of downs. And so I think you really get to see that friendship, that kind of bond shine when you go through the downs. And so you could almost make the argument that going through that middle season struggle maybe could have been the
Mm-hmm.
best that happens to this team just because it sets them up for a tougher path down the stretch. I mean, but when you have such dominant players and leaders, like, I mean, that stretch that Singletary went down in October, the middle
Mm-hmm.
block, I mean, like having 3 straight weeks, I think 2 or 3 straight weeks of being the SEC Defensive Player of the Week in the
Three,
middle of
I believe.
October. Yeah, yeah, three. And having 128 total blocks on the season. I mean, just like you have so much firepower that I mean, I wouldn't want to play Texas. Like, I think that might be one of the best 3 seeds ever in terms of the bracket, just because we
Mm-hmm.
know they're really a 1 seed. Just their performances in the middle of the season didn't live up to that.
And not only that, I don't think necessarily they're gonna be like an underrated 3 seed. Obviously, like it didn't help that they dropped a couple matches what they were expecting, but I mean, you are playing in the SEC now. This isn't like where you were playing in the Big 12 and you could go undefeated and just rightfully so win it out. Like they knew they were going to face some challenges this year, and I think it might have helped them in the long run. Like yes, they're playing a little bit harder matchups. I mean, last year in the tournament they played Tennessee and they went to 5 sets and they almost lost that one, but eventually like they were able to pull it out. But I think when you're playing games that matter so much more now, becomes a lot different. Because I mean, when you're playing in the Big 12, like not to discredit the Big 12 or anything, but
I know what you mean.
when you're playing teams that you're so used to, you know their scheme, you know exactly what they're going to do. Yes, they may get new players in, but it's you get so used to it and you know what the coaching schemes is. You know what the coaching gimmicks are going to be. You know what to expect essentially, that you kind of want to challenge. And I think that's exactly what the first year in the SEC was. They're facing teams they're not used to facing. And obviously, they're coming in with a big target on their back because they're back to back national championships. So I think them getting tested early on not only did it bring the team a lot closer together from an observation standpoint, but I also think it brought them like it allowed them to slow down and take a moment to realize that maybe today wasn't their best game, but let's look at the positives and kind of spin the narrative of yes, we lost, but this is what we did good on.
Yeah, and I think a point that hammers that idea home is they face 16 teams during the season that are going to be
Mm-hmm.
playing in the tournament.
Yep.
9 of those teams are SEC teams. Those are teams that they would have not normally have faced during the year. So you add 9 tournament teams to a schedule, and you're already new to the conference. You're already going to different places. You're traveling to places you haven't played before. And
Yep.
I think that kind of stat just proves alone that like this year's schedule is probably the hardest schedule they've ever had. And the aspect of
Mm-hmm.
playing so many different teams, you're going to different places, and the teams you're playing are also fantastic. And I kind of like what
Mm-hmm.
you were saying. It's not it's not a diss on the Big 12. It's more of an applause of the SEC and the talent that they have. Just that shift. I mean, I think
Mhm.
a stretch that they had was bound to happen. That 3 game losing streak. I mean, that's bound to
Yep.
happen at some point because something would give in the aspect of just not being able to overload yourself with talent to get through it. Now, does that help them in the long run? Does that push them through? I mean,
Mhm.
I mean they've never lost in the first round before. They're being 36
Mhm.
and 0 in the first round. So, I mean, I
Yep.
don't think they're going to have any trouble against Corpus Christi. But once you get to USC and you kind of keep going forward, maybe Creighton down the line, I think that's when you could run into some problems. But I mean, not
Mhm.
being on an SEC heavy side of the bracket, I think may be in their favor.
I completely agree with what you're saying on not being in an SEC heavy side of the bracket helps them out. I think Creighton is definitely going to face a challenge, but I also, if it's not Creighton, I could see them getting past Creighton, but the Penn State matchup is the one where I'm like,
That's the scary one.
well,
That's the scary one
that's,
for sure.
and I think, well, obviously, like, we're looking way ahead, but
Yes, this is a long time away.
it's a long time before that one, but obviously they need to win out these 2 weekends. I think I'm not trying to discredit any team that's going to be in the tournament this weekend again at Gregory Gymnasium, but I do believe USC is going to be their hardest and their toughest matchup. Just
Oh,
because,
for sure.
just because the way, I mean, also USC they weren't in the Pac-12 this year, which I mean, it's kind of weird to say that kind of the Pac-12 doesn't really exist anymore because the
Yeah, now it's the
Pac-12 was so
Pac 2.
dominant.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, not even that, but the Pac-12 was always so dominant in volleyball. And USC is normally one of those teams that's really high up there, but this year they've kind of been slowing down a little bit. They've kind of slowed down a little bit, probably the adjustment of again being in a new conference just like Texas, but I mean,
that travel schedule of being in the Big
I
Ten
was
is
about to say
crazy.
the
Oh my
travel
goodness.
schedule from California all the way to Michigan, like just
To
everywhere,
Penn
like
State, I mean, you're going literally cross
you're
country. You're
you're
going from
going
coast to
cross country.
coast. I mean,
Yeah, and
that's oh my
I think
gosh.
it's weighed a toll on them too, just because like they're traveling through basically three different time zones,
Mhm.
and you're having to adjust your schoolwork. You're having to schedule practices around that. Like it's definitely mentally exhausting, and I think they didn't anticipate. I think they anticipated that it was going to be a little stressful, but I don't think they realized just how much it was going to affect them, if you know what I mean. So
Yeah,
this isn't one of the USC teams that is as strong as they have been in previous years, but it's also a team that's a little more on the low key side. I do see them winning out this week, and that's all they really need to do. Focus one game at a time.
yeah, and then but I gotta ask you, who do you think wins on December 6th? You think you got Texas or you got USC pushing through?
I think Texas pushes through.
You think Texas? I mean, I would agree with you on that aspect,
I
and that
think
would
Texas pushes through. The only reason because I just feel like as of right now, Texas is the most well-rounded and more challenged team, especially with the schedule they played. You talked about 9 SEC teams who were in there, and with USC, like the record, it's not that the record isn't even bad. Like it's about average, but it's not a strong USC team that I've seen in the past. So that's why I was like, oh, okay. Like, I don't know. I think they may go to 4 sets, but I do see Texas winning out. Or, they could completely surprise everybody and Texas just sweeps all week. If they do a complete sweep, they could also do that because they're probably all well rested after senior day. They're probably all locked in. It's like, okay, this is tournament time. Like, let's change it up.
yeah. I mean, Texas 4-0 against Corpus Christi very easily can make that 5-0, and then they're 6-4 all time against SC. It would not shock me if they were to sweep through this weekend
Mm-hmm.
to move on to potentially play. And I'm just going to go ahead and assume Creighton would be that next matchup. I mean, I think we can probably pencil
I
that in
think
for
so
sure.
too.
Yeah,
Unless something crazy happens and
wonky
Creighton gets like
happens.
win out. But
I mean, I
I
think
don't
Creighton
see.
takes care of South Dakota, but that Ole Miss, Florida
Yeah,
State, maybe one of them surprises Creighton, and that kind of opens the door for Texas to kind of jump up to
yeah,
put themselves in a position to meet up with Penn State. Then from there, it's kind of a big question mark. But again, that's so far down the line. I mean,
mhm.
I mean, long time away in the sense of in a week or so.
Yep, no, exactly. I don't think we have anything else other than that's pretty much we shall see how this weekend plays. Well, not even this weekend, but tomorrow and Friday play out
Yeah,
essentially.
long weekend. Let's call it that. Long weekend
A
ish.
very, very long weekend in college sports in general, but
Oh
specifically
yeah.
volleyball as it's officially mid season. That's all from us. Make sure to tune into all of our other sports. We have podcasts every day. We have a podcast every single day of the week. Yep.
Oh yeah, we do big time.
You have to hit stop.
Should I pause it or stop it? Stop it.